Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the extraordinary, honestly, kind of cinematic journey that every single bite of food takes the moment it passes your lips. We all just casually eat every day, right? But beneath the surface, we're firing up a massive, highly coordinated biological machine. We're going to break down exactly how your body digests food, absorbs nutrients, regulates movement, and defends itself. All right, let's jump right in.
So, from your mouth all the way to the end of the line, your gastrointestinal tract is a continuous muscular tube extending nearly 9 meters long. 9 meters! That is roughly the length of an entire school bus just packed inside of you. And within those 9 meters, your food is going to encounter acids strong enough to literally dissolve metal, enzymes that just relentlessly tear down proteins, and an absorptive surface area almost the size of a tennis court. It is an absolute marvel of engineering.
Now, the whole concept of this second brain is absolutely fascinating. See, the gastrointestinal tract doesn't just sit around passively waiting for instructions from your actual brain up top. It possesses its very own intrinsic nervous system called the enteric nervous system. Driven by Meissner's and Auerbach's plexus, this system operates with its own independent intelligence. It's constantly sensing, reacting, and regulating this immense task of digestion completely on autopilot.
Before we trace the path of our food, let's look at the actual architecture of this 9-meter tube. If you take a cross-section of the GI wall, you'll see 4 major layers. First, you've got the innermost mucosa, which handles secretion and absorption. Next up is the submucosa, and that's packed with blood vessels, lymphatics, and nerve. Outside of that sits the muscularis externa. That's the heavy-lifting muscle layer responsible for pumping food forward. And finally, the serosa, or adventitia, acts as the protective outer covering. The crucial takeaway here is that this layered foundation basically remains consistent as we travel down through the body. Section 1, the journey begins, mouth and esophagus. This is exactly where the physical process kicks into gear. Digestion actually begins the exact second food hits your mouth through mastication and lubrication. But hey, it's not just a mechanical process. Your salivary glands, specifically the parotid, submandibular, and sublingual glands, start pumping out saliva that contains water, mucus, bicarbonate, and a super vital enzyme called salivary amylase. This enzyme gets right to work chemically breaking down complex starches into simpler maltose. Once you swallow, the esophagus takes over, utilizing this rhythmic, wave-like muscular contraction called peristalsis to mechanically transport everything downward. Right at the very bottom of the esophagus lies a critical checkpoint, the lower esophageal sphincter. This muscular valve opens just long enough to let food pass and then rapidly snaps shut. Why? Well, because it prevents the highly destructive acidic contents of the stomach from splashing back up. When this valve fails, or even just weakens, acid escapes upwards, and that leads to what we commonly know as GERD, or acid reflux. It's a tiny structure, but man, it's doing a massive protective job. Section 2, the acid bath inside the stomach. Passing through that sphincter, we plunge right into a dynamic reservoir, a vigorous mixer, and a really powerful digestive organ, logically divided into 4 zones: the cardia, fundus, body, and pylorus. Taking a closer look at the stomach wall reveals some seriously complex, specialized labor. We have mucus cells producing a thick, protective lining so the stomach doesn't literally digest itself, which is kind of important, right? Then we have parietal cells pumping out highly corrosive hydrochloric acid, or HCl. Finally, the chief cells produce an inactive enzyme called pepsinogen. Now, here is the really elegant part. The chief cell's pepsinogen is totally harmless until it physically mixes with the parietal cell's acid. That acid instantly activates it into pepsin, which then brutally tears apart dietary proteins. Let's zoom in on those parietal cells for a second, because their clinical importance absolutely cannot be overstated. Yes, they produce the HCl that denatures proteins and sanitizes our food by killing off bacteria, but they also secrete something called intrinsic factor. Intrinsic factor is absolutely non-negotiable for your body to absorb vitamin B12 later down the line. If your stomach just stops producing intrinsic factor, it directly leads to a severe condition called pernicious anemia. Keep that in mind, it's a huge takeaway.
Section 3, the absorption sponge, the small intestine. The stomach carefully meters this acidic mixture right into the small intestine, which is divided into the duodenum, jejunum, and ileum. This signals a major shift. We are officially moving from brutal chemical breakdown to delicate primary absorption.
Now, to absorb nutrients effectively, you need surface area.
If the small intestine were just a smooth pipe, most of your food's nutritional value would honestly just slip right past. Instead, the walls are covered in millions of tiny finger-like projections called villi, which themselves are covered in even tinier microvilli alongside these deep crypts. All this microscopic folding dramatically expands the absorptive surface area of your small intestine to roughly the size of a tennis court. It is literally a hyper-efficient biological sponge. The very first segment of this sponge, the duodenum, acts as a high-stakes mixing chamber. First off, it immediately neutralizes the incoming gastric acid, so it doesn't just burn right through those delicate intestinal walls. Simultaneously, it receives some powerful inputs. The pancreas injects its enzymes, trypsin for proteins, lipase for fats, and amylase for carbs. Meanwhile, the liver and gallbladder pump in bile. Think of bile like dish soap. It emulsifies those stubborn, greasy fat clumps so the lipase enzymes can actually get in there and break them down. For those of you who really appreciate a high-yield breakdown, notice these specific absorption checkpoints. The small intestine is highly localized. Iron, that's specifically absorbed right away in the duodenum. Remember that vitamin B12 we bound to intrinsic factor back in the stomach? Well, that is specifically absorbed at the very end of the line, in the terminal ileum. And those bile salts we just used to digest the fats, they are cleverly recycled and absorbed in the ileum too.
Section 4. The final stages, large intestine and gut motility. After the small intestine has extracted pretty much all the usable nutrients, what's left is pushed through another valve into the large intestine, or the colon. We are now in the final stages.
The main functions here shift primarily to water and electrolyte absorption, effectively turning that liquid waste into solid stool. But listen, the colon isn't just an empty storage tank. It's a thriving ecosystem. Our gut microbiota, or normal flora, live here. It's this beautiful symbiotic relationship. In exchange for a cozy place to live, these bacteria actually synthesize crucial nutrients for us, like vitamin K and certain B vitamins. To clear this waste out, the large intestine relies on deep, squeezing haustral contractions and broad, sweeping mass movements.
Let's quickly contrast those movements with the broader GI tract. How does food physically move around? Well, peristalsis, like we talked about in the esophagus, is a wave-like propulsion. It's all about forward movement. Segmentation, on the other hand, happens mainly in the small intestine. It's a localized, back-and-forth mixing contraction that sloshes the contents directly against that massive absorptive surface area. Oh, and importantly, during periods when you're fasting, something called the migrating motor complex sweeps through the gut. It's basically like an internal housekeeper, clearing out residual food and bacteria. Section 5, the endocrine organ, gut hormones. Okay, so we've covered the mechanics, but let's shift our perspective entirely for a second. This 9-meter tube is not just plumbing. It is actually a massive, highly sophisticated hormone-producing endocrine organ. An incredibly elegant web of chemical signaling orchestrates this entire process. I mean, how does your pancreas know exactly when to release enzymes? How does your stomach know when to make acid? It's all chemical messengers. Gastrin kicks things off by stimulating gastric acid. Secretin senses that acid hitting the small intestine and forces the pancreas to release neutralizing bicarbonate. Cholecystokinin, or CCK, detects fats and proteins, which triggers the pancreas to release enzymes and squeezes the gallbladder to literally dump bile. Finally, GIP tells the stomach to slow down and simultaneously alerts the pancreas to start making insulin. It's just perfectly timed chemical coordination. So what is the ultimate victory of all this mechanical grinding, acidic bathing, and enzymatic cleaving? It's this final nutrient breakdown. We transform the complex food we eat into pure, microscopic cellular fuel. Carbohydrates are snapped down into monosaccharides, complex structural proteins become simple, usable amino acids, and dense fats, or triglycerides, are split into fatty acids and monoglycerides, perfectly prepped and ready to be absorbed right into the bloodstream. But we have to remember the GI tract is essentially an open tube to the outside world, which means it constantly faces incoming microbes and toxins. So it requires a relentless defense system, really a multi-layered security force. We have the sheer destructive power of gastric acid. We've got a thick physical mucus barrier. There's the gut-associated lymphoid tissue, which basically acts as an internal military base. We have the normal flora, which literally outcompete bad bacteria for space. And finally, intestinal IgA antibodies that are just constantly patrolling the lining.
All right, let's hit a quick, high-energy recap of the absolutely vital takeaways here. Parietal cells, they give us acid and intrinsic factor. Chief cells give us pepsinogen. Iron gets absorbed early on in the duodenum, while B12 gets absorbed way late in the terminal ileum. Secretin brings the neutralizing bicarbonate. CCK squeezes the gallbladder for bile. And overseeing this whole operation is the enteric nervous system, our fully independent second brain.
Which leaves us with this final thought. The gastrointestinal system is so much more than just a simple digestive tube. It's this intricate, beautiful dance of nerves, hormones, highly specific enzymes, muscular coordination, and microscopic immune defenses. Every single time you sit down and take a bite of food, you are firing up this spectacular 9-meter machine. So, are you ready to activate the most complex physiological process in your body with your next meal? Thank you so much for exploring this explainer with me today.